Hey y'all, this is Fantasia. Welcome to my channel, Sewing with Tay of the T.A.E Emporium. And today is going to be day 4 of Learn How to Sew in 2 weeks. Today we are going to be talking about seams, seam allowances, and seam finishings. If you're new here, I am currently in the middle of a Learn How to Sew in 2 weeks series where I'm teaching you steps and projects on learning how to sew to be able to get up and running and do some small projects. So if that is your cup of tea, make sure you hit the notification bell and subscribe button so you know when I'm making new videos. And also go over to my Instagram channel and hit the follow button because I'm trying to get more followers on my Instagram page. My Instagram page is the T.A.E Emporium. That's TheAYaEmporium. And there's also a link in the description below. So today, first thing we're going to do real quick is we're going to thread our machine, because we need to get practice and make sure we're getting our machine set up correctly. And then I have some samples here we're going to look at of some seams, seam allowances, and seam finishings. We're going to be talking about knit fabrics and woven fabrics. Oh, look where'd they go? And woven fabrics, so woven and knit fabrics. We're going to do a couple of test stitches, and then I'm going to leave you with that until we start our next day. So let's hop right into threading our machine. Alright, so we're going to quickly thread our machine. We're on a straight stitch here between the 2 and the 3. I have black all-purpose threads from maybe Coats and Clark all-purpose thread coats. So I'm going to put that on there. Put my cap on, safe measures. I'm going to do number 1 at the top, number 2 up here, number 3 is right there. Give it a little pull. 4, 5, give that a little pull. 6 down here. I'm going to thread my needle front to back. We have our bobbin. We're going to pop her in to the bobbin case area. I'm going to hold my string here. I'm going to hold my bobbin to give it a little tension. I'm going to slide that under there. I'm going to hold my top thread, take my hand wheel, turn my needle down and all the way up to pop my second thread out. And here we have 2 threads. So you see here, we have 2 threads, one coming from the bottom, one coming from the top needle, and they're both over the plate. So we're going to take these and we're going to push them underneath the foot, and then we're going to put our cover back on, and now lower our presser foot, and we are ready to sew. The first thing that we have here is seam allowance. The seam allowance is the distance from your stitch line to your raw edge. This is a closed seam allowance. This is pressed closed. This seam allowance is pressed open. Give you a little zoom in. So you'll see here, this is seam allowance on this side. This is seam allowance on this side. It is pressed open. This would be your interior. This seam allowance is pressed closed. So you see that there. So this would be your interior. And this here would be your seam on the outside. So that is your seam allowance, which is the distance again from your stitch line to your raw edge here. Each seam needs to be finished, so when you wash your garments, your fabric doesn't fray. So if you zoom in here, you can see this is fraying. Sorry, you can see this is fraying here on the sides because it doesn't have any type of seam finishing. This here is 3 main types of seam finishings. This is a pinked edge, this is over edge binding, and this is a serger, which I'm going to use in combination with serger, over edge stitch, and zigzag stitch. But the serger is a specific machine that does this type of stitch. It cuts this edge and has an over edge stitch that will finish your seams. This is a closed seam with an over edge stitch. And I can also show you an open seam with an over edge stitch. So this here is an open seam with an over edge stitch on each side. So this is your seam allowance. So you see there, this is 1/2 of your seam allowance, this is the other half of your seam allowance. This would be your wrong side, and that would be You can see that, it's a little dark. That would be your right side, and your seam is right there. And this is where your seam is on the interior. This is a pinking edge. This edge has been pinked to prevent fraying of your fabric, and to do that you just need pinking shears. They look like this, like zigzag paper scissors from when you were a kid, but these ones are just made to cut fabric. And you would trim your edges to make sure that they do not fray. This here is over edge binding. This is a piece of bias binding tape. You can buy this at craft stores like Joann's or probably Amazon if Joann's doesn't make it past this week. But this here is double folded. You can see that there's a fold there, there's a fold there. And it's just put over your seam. So you would trim this seam down, the distance between the stitch line and the edge. You'll trim that as close as you can, and then pop this right on top of here and stitch it closed. Here's another view. This is a double fold bias tape. Sorry if I can get this open. It looks kind of like that. This is a wider version, but it is not folded. So this here, I would actually seam this edge, like I would sew down this crease, and then I would flip it inside and clean finish it like that. This is a different type of bias tape, but it's also a great way to finish your seams. Seam finishings are very important when making garments. It's the best way to ensure quality garments and that you have long-lasting garments because your seams won't fray. So this here is my mock-up for a French seam. A French seam is where your seam allowances are completely encased inside itself. So you see here, this will be the inside of our fabric, and it is completely encased. So to give you a better view, I unpicked this side down here. So you see here, there is my stitch line and my seam allowance. For French seams only, you're going to sew wrong sides together. Remember in previous videos I told you we always sew right sides together, but for French seams you're going to sew wrong sides together. So your seam allowance will end up being on the outside of your garment like that. But you will trim this down as far as it will go, and then you are going to put right sides together. I'm going to zoom out a bit. You're going to put right sides together, and then you're going to stitch down this edge after you've trimmed that original seam allowance. Trim it down to like a quarter, an eighth. You're going to stitch right down this way to encase that raw edge inside of here, which will give you a clean exterior and a clean interior. So now I'm going to do some quick tests to show you. So I have 2 pieces of just scrap white cotton here. I'm going to line it up with these numbers here on my throat plate, and before I do that I'm going to get a close-up so that you can see that a little better. So you can see here is our throat plate. This is our needle and our press fit, and there are numbers here, 3/8, 5/8, 7/8, and they're also on this side on this specific machine, 3/8, 5/8, 7/8. Your seam allowance, which is the distance from your stitch line to your raw edge, is the distance from your needle to these lines. So if I want to sew a 5/8 seam allowance, I'm going to pick my foot up. I'm going to align the edge of my fabric with that 5/8 line right there. I'm going to put my foot down, and this is where I will sew, keeping this edge of the fabric aligned with this 5/8 line to have a 5/8 seam allowance. So I'm going to turn my machine on and I'm going to sew it. Alright, I'm going to start a couple stitches. I back that up just a little bit. Couple stitches forward, hit the reverse button, couple stitches back. Now I'm going to sew all the way to the end. Once I get to the end stop, hit that reverse button, go back a couple stitches, then back to the edge. We're going to lift the foot up, we're going to pull her out, and that is my seam allowance. And for this first one, I'm going to pink it so that you can see it real life. Here we go. It's a little difficult to do this neatly, holding it straight up, but there you have it. We have our pink edge that will prevent fraying. Now, when we sew knit fabrics, we're going to put right sides together. This is not a French seam. We're going to put right sides together. I'm going to switch my stitch over to a zigzag. Make sure you turn it all the way so that it is fully engaged. My stitch width up here is going to be between a 3 and a 4. And I'm going to place her in the same position, about 5/8. And then I'm going to zigzag stitch this guy. But for this, I'm going to sew one, back stitch, and then we're going to go all the way to the end. Oh, it looks like I lost my thread there. The point of me showing you this zigzag stitch is that this seam still stretches. So for knit fabrics, we want to make sure we're using zigzag stitches or using a serger to make sure our seams still have stretch. If you try to do a straight stitch on your knit fabric, I'm going to give you an example here. I'm going to put her back underneath there, but I'm going to have to rethread my machine because trying to record and sew straight, I looked away and I came off of my fabric. It's up here. Snip this guy again. Get her thread up. Fuzzy. Come on. There we go. I can get her out. There we go. Pull her to the back. So we're going to switch her back to a straight stitch. So I'm going to sew. I'm not using pins or anything. You can sew this with a straight stitch if you use elastic thread. That is a trick to this. But here is my knit fabric with a straight stitch, and you will see it has a max. So if I pull this, it will break. This is why we use zigzag stitches for knit fabrics. Alright, so now that we've done the knits, and you don't need to finish the edges of the knits because they do not fray. We're going to try another method here. I'm going to make this one 3/8, which is right along this press-a-fit edge. And we're going to back stitch, couple. We're going to sew all the way to the end. Here is another seam, and now we are going to do an over edge stitch. So that is going to require us to, so the goal is for the needle to zigzag and go over this edge to finish it. The stitch width that's on the top of the machine, we're going to leave that between a 3 and a 4 like we did for our other zigzag stitch, and we're going to see how this goes. So here we go. So here we have a over edge stitch that will help prevent this from future frays. Back to a straight stitch here. Keep this here. We don't need to touch that top anymore. We don't have to touch this here, the stitch width anymore. We can leave that alone. We're going to put this on a straight stitch. We're going to sew one more. I'm going to trim her down. It doesn't have to be perfect. I have my double fold binding here. I am going to pop her over this edge, and then we are going to top stitch very close to this edge. So let's see. This usually takes me some practice, and I'm doing this kind of quick, so we'll see how good I do on camera. So we're gonna stitch forward and back stitch always, and then I'm gonna slide. I don't know if you guys can see this, hold on. I'm gonna make sure that the binding is over that seam edge, and then I'm going to sew very close to this edge of the fabric. And it will look something like this, like that. Alright y'all, to recap, today was a very quick video on seams, seam allowances, and seam finishings. The seam allowance is the distance from your stitch line, your seam line, to the edge of your fabric. Seam finishings is a way to ensure that your fabric does not fray. Woven fabrics will need seam finishings, and knit fabrics will not need to because they will not fray. We talked about 3 major types of seam finishings. That is pinking, that is bias binding, and some version of a serger or an over edge stitch. So that's your recap for today. Hopefully that helps you kind of plan out the things that you plan to sew for your Learn How to Sew in 2 weeks. Your homework is practice getting your machine threaded, practice making straight stitches and zigzag stitches on knits and woven fabrics, and practice finishing your edges. So that's it for today, guys. Thank y'all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I just hit 5,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. I'm super excited about it. But until next time, y'all, bye.